the Rangers Journal now.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Rangers Journal this Friday evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Doug. I will be your CEO on tonight's travel through our Rangers squad. I've got two of our wonderful podders with me today who are going to run rule over the team and decide where we are post-transfer window. So first of all, our very own head of recruitment of Kai Watson. Welcome, Kai. Thanks for coming on this evening.
No worries, mate. I'm looking forward to delving into it. I think the comments will be very active on this one, so let's see how it goes.
Yeah. And just below him, our chief scout, Dave. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, evening, Doug. Cheers for having me on. I think as Kai said, quite looking forward to this one, actually. I think it'll be a good one to sink our teeth into.
Yeah, so welcome to everyone, as I say, who is joining on the chat and across all of our channels tonight, Facebook, YouTube and X. It's good to see everybody coming into the chat there. Evening, RSC72 and Stuart. As I say, we're going to be talking about the squads tonight and looking at how we feel we are sitting post-window. We are, barring any surprises from the free market, now got the team that we're going to be facing the season with. We're going to have a look at what that entails, if it's balanced. Do we still think there are gaps and what those gaps are? We'll touch on the European squad that was just recently announced and the sort of headlines from that. And then have a look at, as well as a little bit of the wider picture. So looking at how does the squad fit in terms of the overall transfer model? Do you have areas of concerns there? Any skill sets that may still be missing? And then kind of just wrap up with our final thoughts. So very first thing I want to do, however, is say thank you to Curry, who has joined as a YouTube member. So despite all my Tavernier positive rhetoric, Curry has decided to support us after all. So a big thank you to him. And we're always thankful to see you, Curry, regardless of your Tavernier opinions. We'll welcome you nonetheless. Okay, so we're going to start off just looking at the squad as a whole. We've got a picture of the whole squad here and what we've kind of got there sitting along with the sort of average ages of each sections. I'll give you a quick rundown of what we're looking at for those of you that are looking and for maybe those that are on audio only. So we have the squad for 24-25. The players in green are our goalkeepers, players in red, defensive. The players in orange are the sort of midfield centric ones, and players in blue, the attacking style. I've got the average ages of each of those kind of blocks across the top, as well as the average age of the full squad. The only kind of one caveat I'll add to that is I've included Lewis Budnauskas as our third goalkeeper. He's the third goalkeeper listed on the website. However, I have been told on good authority that he may in fact be considered the fourth, and it may be I forget his first name now. It's Michael Munn, I think, who's just slightly a little bit younger than him, who may in fact be the third goalkeeper. So other than that, though, that should be pretty much the squad as is. I have stuck a little question mark behind Hadji. As we all know, he's kind of in this weird position right now. We're not 100% sure what's going on with him, other than Clement has said he's not viewed as Rangers number 10. So that may mean he's going to be discounted completely. That may mean he could come in elsewhere, but I think that's one that will probably be just left in the category. So just having a look at that then, I'll come to Kai first. If you just kind of, first of all, just give us your sort of general thoughts in terms of the window. Are you happy with the business we did? And then kind of give us one thing that you're most pleased about, but one thing that you think we're most missing that we can go on to discuss.
I think it was always going to be a tough window. Obviously, people ask the question a lot, like, was it a rebuild? And we had to rebuild the squad, but we still had to cut a lot of wages from that. So we had to completely restructure the wage bill, essentially, while also rebuilding the squad. So the question that I always seen quite a lot was, is it a rebuild or is it a downsize? Well, I thought, like, before the window, I thought that was quite common knowledge that we had to do both. But it seemed like towards the end of the window, there was a question over what one it was going to be. But essentially, it was always going to be both. We knew we were getting the likes of Ryan Jack, Lundstrom, and Barisic off for free, but there was still a lot of business to be done in terms of getting those players that were on higher wages that weren't really contributing the way they should have, or they had contributed and then, like in Goldson's case, contributed less and less and was less effective. So we had to get those players off the book. So it was both a rebuild and a downsize, which I wouldn't have liked to have been in charge of. I know Niles Coppin gets a lot of kind of criticism, but if your hands are tied and you're told you need to not so much half the wage bill, but it couldn't have been far off, like half in every player's wage that come in as a replacement. If you're saying the likes of NCL as a replacement for Ben Davis, maybe not as much of a quarter of the wages coming in on, but it can't be far off those numbers, and that's the kind of theme that went throughout. But I think the one positive thing I'll say is that average age coming down massively. I think that's huge and something we had to deal with over the last few managers. Even spoke about it before we came on. The window that Beale had, the average age was really high, whereas we noticed the start of this window was a lot of younger players coming in, and I think that was necessary. So I'm glad to see we've brought that average age right down. So I think most of the time, kind of last season, the season before, our average age was like 28 in most squads. I know some of the time that was the likes of McGregor propping that up, but it was still pretty high for a club that's trying to be progressive and try to work the transfer market. So glad we've brought that down. I still think as a negative we're very light in the wide areas, especially the wings. Like with Matondo just being injured. Personally, I know some do, but I don't rate McCausland at all. I don't think he's of the standard. He's just turned 21, so Chino is still quite young, but I don't see it a wee bit when he first came in, when he played with that kind of freedom and fearlessness. But that seems to have been knocked out of him. I don't know if it's getting the first team football and not wanting to lose that place. But I think we're very light in the wide areas. Matondo's obviously injured now. Cortez come off a bad injury, played one competitive game, then he's been out for a month. So we'll see what happens when he comes back. But we're really relying on him staying fit, or maybe Igaman obviously come on the wing at Parkhead. I don't know if that's something the manager's going to explore, but I do think we're really light in the wide areas. So happy we've got the average age down. Still think there could have been a bit more business done. I think like the signing of Adozie, I think probably would have changed my mind on it. I think that would have been a really good signing, someone that can play kind of both wings. So that's pretty much my thoughts in the window.
Yeah, I definitely agree about Dozy. I think that's a bit of a strange one, especially the knowledge that it was us that pulled out at the end. I just really want to know what swung that decision if we were so close to signing him. Okay, just before I move over to Dave, I will thank Kevin in the comments there. He's corrected me. It's not Michael, it's Mason Munn. That's the lad's the goalkeeper's name. So thank you for confirming that for us, Kevin. Okay, coming down to yourself, Dave, if we can get your thoughts. Anything that you would add to what Kai said, and also your thoughts on what RFC is saying here. He's talked a little bit about how we were in for Whitaker for around about 8 million odd. All of a sudden, didn't have any money, and then all of a sudden we were bringing in Bajrami for 3 million. He's concerned that there wasn't a plan. How do you think the window went in terms of planning? And do you have any comments you want to add to what Kai said there on the team as a whole?
Yeah, so I guess firstly with RFC's comment there, I'm not convinced the Whitaker bid was legitimate. I think we might have sounded them out. 8 million feels a lot. You're in the middle of a downsize / rebuild, and you're going to spend 8 million on one player. I don't really see it, to be honest. I could be wrong. I'm not saying I'm in the know or anything, but it just felt a bit like lazy journalism, if I'm being honest. It was an awful easy link to make, given that we'd bid for him before. Obviously, he's done well since that. Values shot up, and suddenly we were bidding 8 million for the guy. So I'm not sure I believe that. As far as the window itself goes, I think there was a plan, if I'm being truthful. I think one part of that plan was obviously to bring in some of these younger guys like Kaisman Igamane. and Ciala as well. So there was a bit of future planning there. I'm not sure it's what the fans necessarily wanted to see, because obviously as fans we kind of crave instant gratification. We don't want to hear about 2-3 year rebuilds. In most cases, most folk would have wanted us to go out, sign the players that would make us instantly competitive, and I think Clement addressed that a couple of times actually in pressers through the transfer window, saying, look, yeah, we are going to try and get some players in, and like Proper came in, so we did do that. But he also touched on how important it was to build for the future. Well, if it was true, then fair enough. It just seems wild to me, to be honest. Even if it was possible, even if the money was there, what does that do to the rest of your window if you spend 8 million on one player? I would have thought that would make a significant dent, if not empty your transfer budget. Looking at the squad as a whole, Doug, I guess for me, I actually think potentially our starting 11 is slightly stronger on paper than what it was. I think we've still to see that in effect on the pitch. I'm not saying these guys are world beaters, because we're off the back of a pretty hurtful defeat, if we're all being honest. But I think on paper, once they've had time to settle in and gel, they're potentially stronger. My biggest issue, and I think Kai touched on it as well, is the strength and depth. I just think you get a few injuries in the wrong place. That's quite worrying. So as an example, Dessers gets injured, right? Say what you will about Dessers, but he has been the focal point when things have been going well this season. He gets injured. Danilo's just had an op. Suddenly you're reliant on Igamani that's played 10 minutes of competitive football in Scotland. Similar, you look at the 10 position, yeah, we bought Bajrami in, and again on paper should be quite an upgrade on Lawrence. He gets injured, you're back to having Tom Lawrence as your 10. I know you've popped a few other names in there, but let's face it, as we go through, we're going to rule most of these guys out anyway, I would imagine. So yeah, I think it's not terrible business. For me, the key thing is, I kind of thought this from the start, it was never going to be done in one window, regardless of what a lot of fans wanted. I think it was always going to be a multi-window rebuild, if I'm being honest, mate.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the big things that that we do need to kind of keep in mind, that not everything was going to get fixed this window. I said at the very start of the window there'd be players around who we didn't still want to be around. Cough, cough, right back. And that would just be a symptom of that fact, that we wouldn't necessarily be able to get away from everything. On the point, you kind of mentioned it yourself, Kai, about the idea of downsizing. And Kerry said, so we got a downsizing. That was always the plan, but we were sold a rebuild. What do you think about I feel like there's a lot of friction with a lot of fans between the idea of a rebuild and the idea of downsizing. Can those coexist together? And if so, is that what we're getting, or do you feel like you've been missold the plan in any way?
I think it's a tough one to kind of say if the two of them can coexist, because downsizing wasn't always necessarily the amount of players, but it was the wages we had to downsize. But I do think, I don't know if some of the things that Clement says does get lost in translation, because he does speak English really well. And I know he said a couple of things a few times, and he's had to say at the next press conference that that's not what he meant, and can explain it a bit better. But he did come out and say we would have more coming in than we did going out, which didn't happen, because we had Davis, Cantwell, and Wright all going out, and we only got two in. So I don't know if the plan was to get more in. It's hard to tell, because the club are never or the manager's never going to come out and say this is exactly what the plan was. Niles Coppin's never going to say this is a list of players I had. I wanted 4 from this list of 20 players. We tried, we didn't get them. That's never going to happen, and it's something we need to kind of accept as fans. I know it's tough. Like myself, more than anyone, loves to know as soon as a player's coming in, then I'll go away and make the profile and do that kind of stuff. Like, trust me, there's no one that wants more players to come in more than I do. But it's just accepting that you're never going to know what the actual plan was. We just know for a fact that we had to downsize on the wages while trying to rebuild what was an aging squad. It wasn't just bloated wages. The age or the average age was bloated as well. There wasn't even like a shot of a transfer model. Like there wasn't any players we really had that were going to sell for big money.
Feared to talk now, aren't you, Kai?
Don't upset our
But
brand new
that's-
members.
But that's what it is. Like I get what Curry's meaning, and partially I do feel shafted as well because the manager did say we'll get more in than we did have coming out, but I kind of as the window went on, and as more and we forget, there was quite a few targets that were reportedly close, like really early in the window, like Yusuf Kabadai that ended up going to Augsburg. I think was obviously a winger that could play both sides. It was linked really early in the window. It was widely reported that it was pretty close to signing, and then that didn't happen. So I do think there was a plan at the start. The plan I think's went horribly for them. Like I think they've kind of salvaged a bit of it in the end. But I think if you had the kind of recruitment team looking at the plan they had at the start of the window and then what they got at the end, I think them themselves would be disappointed. So I think it's really tough to downsize and rebuild. And I think I wouldn't say we've failed at it because you don't know. You don't know how these players are going to settle in. You don't know how good Igaman's going to be. You don't know how good Casimir's going to be. It's tough to say until we see Cortez as well when he comes back. It's really hard to tell how good a window it's been until we have the first 11 on the pitch and we see what results they can get.
Absolutely. Dave, in terms of sort of downsizing, if you like, we had a very brief chat, I think it was yesterday, about the squad in terms of its just physical numbers on the board. I'm a fan of having a slightly tighter squad and flexible players, and not necessarily having to have, exactly say 3 for every single position kind of thing. So I think that's more realistic financially. I think it's better for squad harmony, easier to manage and things like that. With that in mind and sort of looking at what we've got here, I want to kind of touch on 2 comments. So the first one is one from RSC72, where he says, every position with an injury away from a disaster, basically. And this comment from Kevin, where he's sort of talking about the use of the academy, having 18 starters and the rest sort of academy players. I've deliberately made sure to include some of the academy players in the graphic here. Some of whom are more likely and less likely to get starts. My opinion, just to start off, in terms of the injury away from disaster, I don't feel like that's true for the defensive side of the team. I think we're reasonably well positioned there. You can argue that we could bring in a bit more quality, perhaps. NCL is obviously untried, so we're not really sure there. But in general, if you were to take the fact that all those players can be used, I think we're reasonably doing okay there. But I think the further forward you go is where the worries are. There's a couple of players there that are less likely to play despite them being there. There's players that I think aren't moving on the way we want, like a Lowry. And then there's players that it looks like we potentially can't rely on, such as both our left wingers who are either injured or inconsistent. What's your thought, first of all, in terms of squad number, and then in terms of, do you think that's true? Do we have the players where we need them to be at this moment in time?
So, I think numbers-wise, just looking at the board you've got here, fine. I think where potentially we hit a problem is when you drill down into some of these players a bit. And that, I guess that kind of links back to what I was saying about, strength and depth. So if we just look at some of these, so Danilo's obviously injured, Desser's fine, Igamane, okay, it's a bit early to make judgment on him, but the fact is the boys played 10 minutes. So if Dessers goes out injured, as an example, right, you've got Igamani and Lovelace up top. Now, one of them's played 10 minutes this season, one of them's played nothing this season. I'm not knocking these guys, right? It could be that we play Igamani and he's the next coming of R9, right? And fantastic, everyone's happy. But equally, what if he's not? You then sat there without a recognised striker. Looking at the left again, and you already highlighted this, Doug. Matondo, we know is injury prone, right? There's no getting away from that. He has been across his Rangers career. Cortez, bit early to say, but the early signs aren't great, are they? He's had quite a few knocks now. Looking at that right side, Journey, absolutely quality. He gets injured, you're back to McCausland, who a lot of us spent last season saying, "I fine as a backup. You just wouldn't want to be relying on in every single game." Again, looking at the 10 position, let's be honest, forget Dow. Lowry, Clements already said he sees as a B team player. He said Hadji isn't playing again. So actually, when you strip that back, you've got two players there. You've got Bajrami and Lawrence. And again, Lawrence is a known quantity. Probably all right for your games against likes of Ross County. Not really who you'd want to be rocking up to Celtic Park in the number 10 position. And to be blunt, Clement obviously agrees because he dropped him for that game. Going into the middle of the pitch, again, McKinnon and Rice are your backups. For all the hype about Rice, he's not had any minutes. McKinnon has had very limited minutes. So really, you're back to 3 players to play 2 positions. Raskin, again, quite injury prone over his Rangers career, which leaves you Barron and Diamande every single game in what is a really high energy role in Clement's system, because they're not really 6s, they're not really 8s, they kind of drift between them. So, if you look at that entire front third of the pitch, or even half of the pitch, a couple of injuries in the wrong place, and yeah, I think you are actually pretty close to a disaster. I'd argue defensively, on paper, we probably do look stronger. I think Proper, Suter, Balogun, and Casa, as we're all going to call him, because nobody can fully pronounce his name. So that's your 4 defenders. That does give you a wee bit of depth. Looking at the left side of defence, all right, Yilmaz, we know, is injury prone, but you have got Jefte and Fraser there. I actually quite like Fraser. He's probably, for me, the pick of the academy products that are coming through. But then on the right, again, Sterling is incredibly injury prone. Devine hasn't done it for me. I wouldn't want to be relying on him. So again, even yourself, Doug, I know obviously you're the big Tav fan, but injury to Tav, you're suddenly a bit dicey. So I'd say actually in most positions, it is a concern. I think looking at this as it is, you've got the numbers, but have those numbers got the quality? That's probably debatable.
Yeah, and I do think some of that does come from like the unknown. Like you say, players like McKinnon, Rice, Devine, even Fraser to a degree, Loveless, Igamani, all players that are there. They've been there for various amounts of time, but they're all still unknown quantities to some or all degree. I agree. I think in terms of the number itself, it's a decent enough number. But I think the spread of players I would like to be a little bit. If we kind of put aside the unknowns in terms of Divine and things like that, the spread I think could be a little bit better. Although we're lucky in that we've got quite a few flexible players, which when you get as many injuries as us, I think is going to potentially be key. So, for example, I'll be interested to see if Igamani does end up playing, in kind of the wing positions at points. You could end up with like a Danilo up front, Igamani on the left, Cherney on the right, and Bajrami in the centre. Or Igamani and Danilo could be other way around. Danilo in the centre with Bajrami on that. You could do a lot of different things potentially, which might help to save if there are injuries. But I think that would work for a team with the normal amount of injuries. So whether or not that works for us and how many injuries we're going to get moving forward, I suppose we shall see.
But then, Doug,
yeah.
can I just come back on that point a second? Are you not
Yeah.
then back into the position of square pegs, round holes when we're shuffling people about? I know some of them are adaptable, but some of them, yeah, okay, you could play them there, but they're not really proficient there, are they?
Well, what I've tried to do is only include positions on this that the player has had a demonstrable period of time in. So I've kind of went through each one and looked and said, right, it says he can play there, but how many games has he actually done? So anyone who's noted in a position should have played at least 10 games in that position at some point. Apart from maybe one or two who I left in just because I'm less familiar with them. Like for example, I mean, I'm going to give it a go. Casson Virgil. That's what I'm going with. I'm going to stick with that.
Not bad.
You know, he's down as a centre back / right back. Most people, and from what I've seen, seem to be considering him as a right back. And I don't know if that's just because of their desperation to not have Tavern right back. But when I looked into it, he's played most of his games at centre back. Although more recently he's been playing right back. So again, with young players, they can potentially move about. So it can be. I think that's another thing that we maybe have to be wary about. Because obviously young players can move positions. We've obviously had King. He's apparently in midfield. He's apparently a midfielder now, having played centre back and then right back and various other things. Young players can move about because obviously they are still developing. They're finding their best skills, and that can cause them to move. So with a younger base of players, that might be something that we find that players do move about a little bit before then finding their position. And I suppose that's something that we'll see with some of them. So we've got Kieran here saying that Igamani is mainly a winger, from his point of view. So that could be something we see.
I don't care where he plays. I've been guaranteed that boy's getting us 10 goals this season. And I've got a clip to prove it.
That's true. Well, I can't remember who it was that said it, but they said that the best ability is availability, and that's definitely something that we could use. Okay, I'm going to push as far as a little bit then. Still on the squad, but just going to switch up the display ever so slightly, just to look at the European squad. So it's exactly the same layout, same players. I've just adjusted it to reflect the European squad. So any player that's outlined in orange is a List A player, which means that they are in the registered list of players, and you have to be in order to play. Any players that are in white are either not picked, or if they have a small orange sort of circle with a B in it, that means that they're in the B list. So the B list is basically any player that's been at the club for a while and is 21 or younger from, I think it's the 1st of January. So that actually encompasses pretty much all of our young Scottish players because they're all kind of at that point. We'll have a big rush of them next year who will potentially who will require registering, and we'll fill up some of those unused slots that are noted in the top right there. Those are the club trained and association trained players who I have marked as well. You have 4 slots for each of them, and we currently use 2 of each. So Kelly and Budnauskas are club trained players. Kelly, funnily enough, is a club trained player from a decade ago because he was obviously with us when he was a youngster, and that still counts. Whereas Budnauskas is obviously a youngster now. And the association trained players are basically players who have been trained by other clubs within our association, Scottish FA. So that includes Sutter, who obviously came through at Hearts, and Bannon, who came through at Aberdeen. So there are, if you want to use the kind of old vernacular, the homegrown players. We do have slots available for that, so that's why our team is smaller than usual. You can register 25. We, I believe, have registered 21, 22, one of the two. And we have touched on, I think, there's pros and cons, and that's something that maybe I'd like to hear from the two of you, starting off with Kai, in terms of the pros and cons of should we have gone out and looked for more Scottish talent to sign to to have the ability to have a bigger squad, or is it better to just leave it if there's not the talent there that would make the difference or be starting players in terms of playing in Europe?
I think, again, it's a hard one. Like, obviously, as much as we don't want to talk about them, Celtic went out and signed Luke McCowan, who I thought I'd rather have in the team than Tom Lawrence. Again, an association trained player. I think considering the amount of injuries that we get, missing 4 slots is massive. As much as you can use like as many players on the B list as you want, do you really want to be relying on them that heavily in European games? Like, this is where we kind of need to get the money back that we missed in the Champions League. I know we got a really hard draw, probably more difficult than some of the Champions League draws, but it's where we're probably looking to get a bit of money back, get a bit of a European run, and then just looking at that. I mean, if Cortez gets injured, you're relying on Igaman to get out on the left. If he's not there, it's the likes of Lovelace or McCausland you're using. It's a really thin squad, and we really can't afford to have those 4 gaps. But it's a good point you make, Doug. Actually, like, would those players that would have filled those 4 slots actually have improved the team, or would they just be in there making up numbers? I know Cammy said it a few times in the chat when we were talking about the likes of your Lyle Camerons, your Luke McCowans, that we didn't have the money to waste on like squad players because of how much the first 11 was needing to improve. So it's quite a tough one when you look at how the window panned out. Would it have been different? Would we not have got Bayrami if we would have went for McCowan and say Cameron? But then we would have had at least an extra player in a slot and still filled that number 10 position. So I think it's all depends on the financials at the end of the day. Because if you're bringing in the younger players, then I don't know if they can go on the B list if they've came from another club. Do they still count if they're under 21? Like, if we would have bought Miller and Watson, would they still be on the B list? So they still wouldn't use a slot. That's something I'm not 100% sure on. So I don't think there's that many homegrown players that are over 21 that would have made a massive difference to the squad, but it still would have been nice to be able to fill those 4 slots. But I think that's a historical thing that we've not historically went after those players. Just because the standard's not there now doesn't mean it wasn't a failing in the previous window. And I do think we've failed in previous windows to get the best young Scottish talent in. So that goes back 4, even 5 years when you're looking at that. And that's part of the reason why we've not been able to fill those 4 slots, which really could come back to bite us in the Euro squad if we get a few injuries throughout the games.
Absolutely. I do believe, it's my understanding, if, for example, we'd signed Lennon Miller, he would be a B-list player. Well, in fact, no, he wouldn't, because he hasn't been with the club long enough. So, although his age, he would be registration. Because Chelsea hadn't exactly that. So yeah, so he would be registered because he's not been with us long enough. But funnily enough, because how old is he? Is he 17 as well?
Just turned 18.
Just turned 18. I'm trying to remember. I think it's 2 years or 3 years. There's a possibility he might come in, have to be an A-list player, but because he's so young, then be with us long enough to become a B-list player, and then the next season become an A-list. That might be a year out. I'm not sure, but that would be amusing. Yeah, I have to credit Adam Thornton from Heart and Hand with that thought in terms of is it not worth buying players unless they're going to be first-team players sort of thing. That I was a big proponent of we should be going out and getting players until they did a really good pod with the guy from Twitter. What's it called again? The guy that does all the coefficient stuff. That's the one, yeah. The coefficient guy from Twitter. They did a really good pod over at Heart and Hand about that. And Adam Thornton sort of brought that thought in and really kind of turned my opinion on that one. So if I come to you, Dave, on this, the 2 headline points of the European group were obviously Matondo and Danilo have not made the European squad. So the sort of immediate thought on that is, well, they're both injured, so that would seem to make sense until you kind of look at it and go, well, obviously the European run goes all the way into January now with the amount of games that we play. And Matondo, admittedly, he's more longer term injured, so that maybe makes a bit more sense. However, Danilo's only meant to be, I think, 4 to 6 weeks. Now, you could argue with rehab afterwards, getting back to fitness, maybe it is just not worth it. But Do you think that we could come to rue that decision anyway? Should we have just, it doesn't make a difference if you register him or not in terms of other than he can or cannot play. Should we have registered him anyway, or do you think could this be a move towards player well-being? We saw with Chelsea, they've not registered arguably one of their best players in Cole Palmer for their European campaign, and they said it's because we're just going to have him play in the league games. That's what we want the focus for him is, and we're not going to overload him. So could that be what we're thinking with Danilo because he's got this growing injury issue? Did we want to just draw a line under it and say, right, he's not in the European squad, so we can just focus on having him play in domestic games and building his fitness back up that way?
Feel like I'm being set up a bit here, Doug. But yeah, we've obviously talked about this in the group chat. My personal inkling, and again, this is just my theory, but I'm not convinced Clement fancies him. If I'm being totally truthful with you, mate. I think, okay, not registering him for this in isolation probably does make sense with his injury. He's been out for a very long time, come back. I think it's reasonably kind of common that you can pick up kind of side injuries on the return from what he had, or at least so the medical experts on Twitter have told me. So I guess there could be a welfare element, but I think if you look before that, if you look at kind of those first few games of the season, and he got no minutes whatsoever. Now, I'm not saying he should have been playing every game, but you would have expected him to at least get some minutes in that. And even with the kind of the trouble that we had at Parkhead, he wasn't chosen to come on. I can see here, until proper signal that he wanted to come off. But you've got a choice between Igamani and Danilo. I think for me, proper is potentially a wee bit of a red herring. Yes, we needed to bring someone on for him, obviously, but we did bring Igamani on. And to me, again, that's just another indicator that I think potentially Clement prefers the thought of Igamani, giving him the minutes, getting him up to speed as ahead of Danilo. I think Gary it was as well. Also put in a really interesting comment about this. When did we know about this injury? Did we know about this before we registered the squad? Or did we know about it after? That again potentially is a bit of an indicator there. If we didn't find out about that injury till afterwards, then is there really a reason not to pick him unless you just don't fancy him? So for me, yeah, as I said, I could well be wrong. It could just be, as you say, the welfare thing, easing him back after a long-term injury, especially in a squad that is as kind of prone to injury as us. But there's a few things now that I'm just starting to wonder if Clement actually just doesn't rate him, to be honest with you, mate.
Yeah, and an interesting thought there. Okay, so the last kind of point before I want to sort of move us on from the squad in general then is obviously the one minor asterisk that we have is the free market. We have seen players getting snapped up, a couple of ones that were profiled by Kai as well, getting picked up by others. So Stuart in the comments here has said, if we don't go into the free market, it's a mistake. Probably shows how broke we are. So just sort of very quickly, I'll get one from each of you, starting with you, Kai, as you've looked at a lot of them in detail. If we were to go into the free market, who's the one person right now that you would want us to bring in?
As of Thursday, it would have been a different answer. Like I obviously put it in one of the chats. I had a video planned for Thursday, and then I woke up Thursday morning, went to check on two of the players. Ignatenko, that had been released from Bordeaux, had signed for Slovan Bratislava, which fair enough, they're going to be playing the Champions League this season. He's going to be lining up against Celtic actually. And then the kind of report came out that Stephen Alzati, who I was told was offered to the club earlier in the window, the club weren't interested, but was still a free agent. was going to sign for Hull, and I've not seen the confirmation of that, but I've been told that was pretty much confirmed. And then the only other player that was in the video is Tom Hay, who I stuck the profile on Twitter today. So he's now an Indonesian international, grew up, I don't know where the Indonesian comes in from it, but played for the Netherlands at youth levels, plenty of Eredivisie experience. Despite being the deepest line midfielder, he still managed to create over 2 chances per 90 and got 4 goals and 4 assists last season. He's 29 years old, but he's an experienced head. Again, I think the Eredivisie's, despite the translation of players coming over, I think the Eredivisie is of a higher standard. It's just maybe the play style that players can't adjust to. So Tom Hay would be my pick, but again, there's not much out there. I also would have taken Stuart Armstrong before he signed for the Whitecaps, despite where he's previously been.
Okay, and what about yourself, Dave? Is there anyone in that kind of out of contract market that's caught your eye at all?
No, mate. There actually isn't, to be honest with you. I think there's probably reasonable players left. As Kai's just alluded to, I think a lot of the potentially decent or preferable players have now been snapped up. And I would be worried about pushing money at players just for the sake of getting players in. I think we've had long enough. If we wanted any of these guys, we would have approached them at least by now. And to me, it would just kind of reek of almost a panic buy. I know it's not a buy, but you know what I mean. It's bringing someone in to appease fans as opposed to bringing someone in because we've identified them and thought, yeah, this will fit Clermont's system. And Clermont's gone, yeah, I'd be really keen to have them. I think the other thing, Kieran's comment there, out of contract players aren't free. We'd still have to lay out probably a more significant signing on fee because they're on a free, and that's before you get into wages and everything. So for me, given that we've kind of passed on all these guys so far today, I don't actually see the point in bringing them in just to keep fans like us happy because we all want to see more players.
Good point. Well made there. Okay, so the next thing that I want to kind of push us forward on is sort of looking at the squad in the slightly wider context of the transfer model. Obviously, it's something that we hear about all the time, and that we obviously want to make better use of or apply better to the club in terms of selling players at the right time, and for ideally good fees. I do think one of the pluses from the window is that we've got a lot more saleable assets now. Obviously, bringing the age range down has meant that we've got more younger players that are players with potential that we can obviously ideally train, hopefully play well in Europe in particular, where they're going to catch the eye of other teams. So the key then is going to be therefore getting rid of them at the getting rid of that sounds terrible. Selling our beloved players at the right times to get the maximum for them in the market. So to kind of have a bit of a look at that, I've put together this lifespan graphic here. So just to give you a quick look at what you're looking at, the colour scheme is the same. Goalkeepers in green, defenders in red, midfielders in orange, and attackers in blue. Where the player's number is seated is either where they signed their contract with us or when they signed their last extension. If it's a player that's had an extension, all this information is based on what is available to me on Transfer Market, so don't shoot me if it's not 100%. And then the lines represent the time scale that they will presumably with the club if they see out the contract that they currently have with us. Apart from, I think there's 2, maybe 3 who have a slightly different, they've mostly just got wee lines at the end. 1 or 2 have a wee cone at the end, and that's because Transfer Market didn't have an end date for their contract. So I've just put it at 3 years as kind of a standard level. You've got all the players obviously shown on the left there, and the years along the top and bottom. So I think we can see we've kind of got 3, to me, straight away. There's kind of 3 very obvious points where there's clusters of players. So you've got summer of 25, summer of 26, and summer of 27, and then you've got a couple then that are extending out even further. But you can see the majority of players have been here for less than about a year and a half, 2 years, apart from one or two. Obviously, you've got Tavernier, who goes off the edge of the page because he's been here for that long now. So, having a look at that, sort of again looking at the groups of players and considering the age things, where do you think we are, Kai, in terms of, do we have a good selection there? Do you think there's good numbers in terms of where they're sitting within the years? Or is there anything that concerns you about the sort of the makeup of the squad in terms of their sort of contractual statuses?
In terms of the longer term deals, there's not too many that are really concerned. Danilo's on quite a long contract. If we decide that he's not the one to go forward and try to get rid of him, it's quite a long contract to get rid of. But in terms of the rest of them, probably pretty happy. I know there'll be a few that wish obviously look at the lifespan there and think that Tav maybe should have went by now, but everything's easier in hindsight when seeing that kind of decline in performance to say now that they should have went however long ago. Again, like I say, everything's easier in hindsight. But there's nothing too concerning. I think it's good that the younger players we brought in we've got for a while. So they're in longer term deals. Obviously, unless they end up being terrible, and that's a completely different issue. But it's a good sign, I think, to bring in these players that you think you're going to be able to get a bit of money for. Because if you're only signing them on a 3-year contract or a 2-year contract that takes them a year to get to a decent level, then you're trying to sell a player or try to get maximum value from a player that's on an expiring deal. So I think given those 3, 4 things, that even a 5-year contract Tigerman's got there, giving out those longer contracts means that if they do end up being a star and we're trying to sell them for more, you're obviously going to be able to get a bit more money for a player that's got 2 or 3 years in their contract instead of kind of 2 and dwindling down. So nothing overly concerning. I still think there's quite a few we'd like to shift there, but I think the contracts handed out this summer have been pretty positive and they've done the business a bit more kind of cleverly than they have in previous years.
Yeah, coming over to yourself, Dave. I'd said with the guys that I didn't know the contract lengths. I'd given them 3 years, and that was just because my automatic kind of thought when I'm thinking about a contract is, oh, a contract of 3 years. But putting this together, one of the things that I did notice, and then when I started to think about it, it does make sense, is long contracts are now, if not already, very much imminently becoming the norm because of the impact of financial fair play. You're wanting to amortize your costs over slightly longer periods. So I think we are seeing more 4-year deals now. As Kai pointed out, Igmani's on a 5-year deal. And I think that's something we're probably going to see more often, particularly with the young players, like Kai said. So they've got time to develop. We've got time to then, have that sweet spot. So I think that sweet spot is actually around about year 3, because you're going to come in for a year, get your foot in, come in for a year, play solidly, and then hopefully back that up again. And then I think you're likely to have clubs starting to come in for you, particularly if you've had 2 decent years in Europe. Is that something that you expect to see as well, or are 4 or 5 year contracts what you think are going to be the norm for when we're buying these younger players? And what's your general thoughts on the squad in this respect?
Yeah, so I think it has to be, mate. I think absolutely you're right about amortizing the fee over the length of the contract. And it's also about protecting the value of these players, isn't it? If you've got them on a longer contract, you're automatically on a firmer negotiating position, even when clubs do come in. I think the important thing for me, and I'm pretty sure the club will have learnt this lesson given the fact that we've spent all summer downsizing, is that has to be aligned with lower wages initially. I think, Igaman is probably quite a good example. I did see someone quoting 14.5k. I'd be amazed if he's on that. I think it's probably significantly less. So these younger guys coming in on lower wages with longer term deals almost protects you in a way from the kind of ones that Kai alluded to, where maybe they come in, there might be some wonder kids or highly rated, but actually when they get the chance, they don't take it. That kind of protects you. The problem that we've had historically is we've had senior pros on 30, 35k a week on massive long-term contracts. And if you decide you want rid of them or whatever, then one, they're going to expect a selling club to match that. Two, if they're on a longer term contract, there's absolutely nothing stops them just sitting there taking a wage each week, whether the manager wants to play them or not. And that's how we kind of ended up in this position where we're punting out, millions of wages and getting very little value back for it. Specifically on the squad now, I think what's really interesting is if you look at these kind of ones that have got the slightly longer terms, they're all the people you would expect. So your Igamane, your Baron, your Dio, Yefte, all these kind of guys that we've identified, right? These are going to come in, they're going to do a job for us, but we also think they're going to have a really good sell on value and fit into that player selling model or player trading model, sorry. Then they're all the ones that've got the longer term contracts. Whereas, like your Dessers, I mean, what's he due? 27, isn't it? And that's what you would expect to see as well. So, as your players' age increases, depending who you're looking at, you would expect them to have a smaller contract. I think where you really want to use these longer term contracts is when it's low wage, potentially a high sell on value.
Absolutely. Kai, one of the things that Dave mentioned there is obviously young players on low wages. And I'll just bring up a comment from Curry about the FAPs causing longer contracts but costing clubs to get rid of players when they're on high wages. How do you think is the best way to manage the players, the players that do come in on smaller wages, if they are performing well and therefore potentially going to be looking to renegotiate their contracts to get more money from us, particularly if they've maybe come in as not an automatic first choice and then become a first choice player? How do you think is the best way to manage that in terms of the lengthening of existing contracts when they're already long and hiring wages? Should we be looking at just saying to a player, okay, we'll keep your contract length as it is, but we'll increase your wages because you've been here 2 years and you've done well? Or do you think there'll always be an element of there's going to be an extra year added, which is, I think, kind of what we've seen in the past with these deals? Usually players have at least a year added on when they renegotiate these things.
I think it's an interesting one and one that probably go case by case basis. I think, don't quote me on this, but was Bassey didn't get a new contract before he was sold, was he? Was he on the original deal that he came in on before we managed to sell him?
I think so, yeah.
So I think if that's a possibility, it's something I think we should really consider, especially going by the player trading model. Like if the player is reaching that level and you're looking at bids of 10 plus million, it's then a consideration of, do you sell at that point? We famously haven't done that, and it's came back to bite us a few times. So I actually think for another maybe a couple of years or however long it takes for us to get a player trading model in place at that point, instead of renegotiating the contract, we should maybe look to sell if they're at kind of that level. But then I do think if we are renegotiating the deal that I think you need to add in that year, there's obviously a chance that the form dips. A look at Chris Burke. I know I'm going back a while, but Chris Burke was electric when he first came into the team. Everybody loved him, thought he was going to be the next big thing. Got a new contract, then it looked as if he hadn't kicked a ball at times before. Like, it's one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. I remember, I don't know how big the contract was, but the rumours were it was a bit of a bumper deal that he got. And then it looked like he forgot everything that made him good. It's honestly one of the weirdest things I've ever seen, but that's an example I always think of. It's a danger. I know we did manage to move him on and he went on to have a good career, but I don't think we got the kind of money the club probably would have expected. I think he was probably expected to be like Scotland's first choice right winger. Rangers would have made good money on him, but he would have been a Rangers player for years, and that just never happened. So that's the risk. But I do still think to protect yourself, you do need to add a year on. I maybe wouldn't add any more than that. I'd maybe just go, if you're adding anything on, I'd add a year just in case. Again, like I said earlier, if you're looking to sell a player, it's easier to sell a player that's got or for the selling club, it's easier to get more money for a player that's got longer in their contract than one that's on an expiring deal.
Absolutely. Okay, Dave, I'm going to bring you in on the next part of this to start us off. The last thing I wanted us to touch on tonight was obviously we kind of looked at the squad numbers and balance positions. So I would have a slightly deeper dive and look at the kind of skill bases that we have. I think we've talked a lot about things like, for using the midfield as an example, who's playing in a 6 or an 8 or a 10. Can people do different variations? So to kind of have a look at that a little bit, not in too much detail, I've just kind of picked out a couple of the key areas. So kind of basically the spine of the team, our centre backs, midfielders and centre forwards. I've not included everyone, just kind of some of the main players and new players in there. I had a wee look at kind of the general areas that their skills lie. So if anyone's not seen these kind of diagrams before, your top section there is attack, and then reading around in clockwise order, it's attack, technical, tactical, defence, and creativity. So it's basically the closer the players' lines are out towards the edges, the better they are at that particular sort of side of the game. So having a look at, I'll open it up completely for you, Dave. Looking at any three, whichever one you'd like to touch on. Looking at that, do you think there's anywhere in particular that we're significantly lacking that we need to build up on? And also, to throw a more specific question, looking at Bajrami and Igamani in terms of new players, I feel like they stand out as being slightly different from the crop. So do you think that's a benefit, and how so?
Yeah, so I think that last point's really interesting, and I suspect a lot of it comes down to the way that Clement wants to play. So we've talked on numerous pods about Clement needing to get his own players in to fit his own system, how he wants to play. I think that variation from sort of his players, if you will, to the ones that were here already is quite a visual example of that in practice. I think the key one that jumps out for me, and I'm not sure kind of what this data is aggregated over, is it this season, is it kind of longer term? But looking at Igamani's radar there compared to the others, all right, he's a bit lower in creativity. But actually, there's an argument, if you take these at face value, he should actually be the best striker at the club outside of the creativity side. Now, I can see Kai chomping at the bit to tell me this isn't actually foolproof. It's not, you can't just look at this and say, right, that's the best player. But actually, as I say, if you just look at the attributes on their own, we should have a really exciting player there. And I think Kai's probably drop down into the stats a lot more than just the top level points, and that's probably what drove the 10 goal prediction. But yeah, that is potentially quite exciting. I think Bajrami as well stands out. Again, on paper, he should actually be more attacking than any of our other midfielders. Ioke's a 10, so's Lawrence, who actually isn't on there. But yeah, out of the ones that we've highlighted, he should be our biggest attacking threat. And then just shifting over to your defence, I mean, Balogun, best at defensive side of it, doesn't actually surprise me. I love Balogun to bits, mate. I wish it was 10 years earlier and he was injury free, but there we are. If it was, he probably wouldn't be here, I guess. I think just looking at that, Proper is potentially the closest to a Balogun. And I know in a lot of folks' minds, he'll be a bit tainted at the minute because he had a pretty poor old firm. But actually, again, I think for me, that first couple of games, and I mean, I've said this a few times, I'm probably a bit more old school than the kind of radars. I'm a bit of an eye test guy, but that was one of the things that jumped out at me actually, was he did seem quite up for the actual defending side of defending. rather than the technical stuff in his first game or two. So again, I think for me, those three, proper Bayrami and Igamani, I'll be quite excited to see how they get on. I was already, but seeing this data kind of suggests that we should be expecting some pretty good stuff from them.
Hopefully, yeah. Just to fill in that gap, the scores are based on their performance over the past 2 years. In terms of just how they performed. So in theory, it should provide a decent average.
So you telling me that Igamani did play professional football before he came to Rangers?
on real pitches and everything.
Oh, wow. Jesus. Learn something every day.
What about yourself, guys? Anything particular you'd want to highlight on that before we finish off?
Just I really like the Bayrami's radar at how he's just that step above in the technical side, the creative side, and the attacking side. I think it's obviously everybody else's radar, and that's a bit bunch, and you just see Bayrami being that step above in the areas that we need him to be, and that's really nice to see. I'm not actually that surprised that Egerman kind of looking a bit more technical than Danilo and Dessers. I think Kieran obviously pointed out earlier that Egerman can play on the wing really well. He's good at taking on opponents. He's got really good ability on the ball. Even seen that the only time he had the chance to, he won the ball back against Celtic and he managed to take it past a player and then play a really good kind of pass to the middle of a couple of players. So I think if he can continue showing that ability, showed it in Morocco. So I'm not actually that surprised after watching the footage and kind of seeing the numbers that he ranks higher in those areas. And like Dave said, if he can translate that into Scottish football, then it's really exciting and he'll easily get to that 10-goal mark by about March. They just give him his chance. But those are the big standouts to me. The biggest one being Bayrami being a step above all the other midfielders in creativity, attacking and technical, which is exactly what we need from him. I'm really excited to see him, especially with how much Albanian football on Twitter's been kind of bigging him up. So he's going to have a lot to answer for if he doesn't perform here.
Aye.
We've got a question there for you, Kai. Have you heard of Nduka Jr.?
I have not, but it's a name I'll definitely go and have a look at.
Profile in 10 minutes, Kai.
I was going to say exactly that. Keep an eye at RFC. You'll maybe get a player profile at some point in the future. Yeah, I have to say on the Igamani point, it kind of makes it all the more frustrating that we've been waiting so long, that there's potentially this diamond waiting to come out. So hopefully that's what we will end up seeing. But on that kind of point, we've just passed the hour mark now, so I'll bring things to a close there. I hope everyone's enjoyed that look through and deep dive into the squad tonight. As I say, we've kind of looked at various different things, the squad balance and size, what we thought was good about the window, player lifespans and contracts. I will be publishing some of these slides on my Twitter feed later on, so if you want to have a look at them yourselves, you can do so. Just head over to my Twitter, which is noted on the screen there, the Glimmer Twin. And you can see those slides if you want to have a look at them yourselves. So hopefully, as I see, these are the players that are going to be taking us through the rest of the season. Certainly in majority, if not minority. We may obviously add to that in January, and I'm sure we'll come back and rediscuss things then if we do. But for now, it just remains for me to thank Kai for joining us this evening.
That was a pleasure, mate, and I just wanted to say a shout out to Doug for those incredible slides. He sent us them earlier, and me and Dave are both like, it's going to be a good pod tonight. So, shout out to Doug for putting those slides together. So I think they're really impressive to look at and easy enough to talk to.
Thank you very much, Kai. It's very kind of you, and thank you to Dave as well.
Aye, cheers for having me on, mate. Pleasure as always.
And as ever, the biggest thank you goes to you guys in the comments and watching across the various social network platforms. Thank you for tuning in every night that we are on and for spending your Friday early evening with us. Please, as I say, if you do enjoy the content, like and subscribe to get all the Rangers Journal videos in your feed. We do always do the live stuff during the evening, but there's also loads of videos that get put up by Kai on players and various other profile-based things to do with the club. So there's loads to find if you do subscribe to us. So thank you once again for joining us. And do remember that every night is Rangers Journal night.